I'd like to thank my colleagues for putting this on, particularly Duncan Jarman and Jane has done a great job again on a fantastic conference. I hope you're all really enjoying it. I always do. I love these conferences. Thanks to my colleagues as well for putting me forward to give this talk. I'll try and do what I can. I'm going to talk about microfluidic perfusion channels and why we, namely Sophion, think that they're actually really useful for fast, efficient, low-volume applications, and consequently they make for a very good perfusion format for ligand-gated ion channels. Being Danish, rather than a match made in heaven, it should probably be more in the Norse mythology of the afterlife, so perhaps that should be Valhalla. And your Danish word of the day, Valhalla, very useful as you'll find in everyday Danish life, is Valhall. So there you go, your Danish word of the day already in. Okay, a lot of you may well know the manual patch clamp technique, where you effectively have static cells because they're adherent cells on the glass cover slip. You apply the electrode by manipulating it down to the cell. So you're moving the electrode to the cell. In automated patch clamp, the engineering solution we came up with is we have these planar patch arrays of recording sites. So here you can see 4. And you actually move the cell in a suspension to the recording site. That's planar patch, which is used on automated patch clamp, because you can take these suspensions to the recording plate with multiple arrays of recording sites to do your multiple recordings upon. So that's how we do automated patch clamp. So the next engineering problem is, how do you get your efficient, fast solution exchange in this kind of capability? And at least the way we do it is by microfluidic perfusion channels. So here you can see there's 2 channels. One is going to be your intracellular channel, which runs beneath the recording site, which is here. There you've got the orange spheres, which are cells, and they can be applied with the recording solutions and test solutions via this external or extracellular microfluidics channel. Okay, so that's the microfluidics cross-section. That's one recording site. You can have anything from, let's say, 16 to 48 to 384 of these recording sites on a plate, depending on the platform. These microfluidic channels guide the cells to the planar recording site. After you've formed that gigaohm seal on the recording site shown in the middle there, you can wash away surplus cells. And as a consequence of this architecture, this design, you've got a low volume, fast, efficient exchange of test solutions. And as I will show you in some slides to come, hopefully that makes for good ligand-gated ion channel stimulations via these fast, efficient exchanges. Okay, so now I'm going to actually sort of go into 2 different formats of how you might be doing this on, for instance, an automated system. You've got that microfluidic channel. So here you've effectively got your pipetta. It will be putting in this solution, and this is your extracellular or EC, and here's your intracellular solution beneath the recording site. For a bucket-style well or an open well, you effectively have an access point in the top of the well that allows the pipetta to be dropping your solution into a fixed volume well. So there's no through flow on the open bucket well. So consequently, the microfluidic sort of application cycle of your solution would be an add, displace, and replace. It's almost a fluid column that forms in that microfluidics channel is added initially in this yellow. You will then displace it, and you're almost replacing it as that fluid column goes through the microfluidic channel. In contrast, the open bucket well, you're effectively adding to a fixed volume well. There's no through flow, so it's going to be an add, dilute, mix, and then if need be, even remove, add, dilute, remix in repetitions. As a consequence of these 2 different formats for the microfluidics, you're putting the exact concentration you want on first time, whereas for the open bucket well, you'll be doing, it'll be a multiple of the test concentrations. You'll need to have a higher concentration that will equilibrate with the rest of the volume of your fixed volume well. And so this is what we might do, for instance, for a first test solution application with a microfluidic channel. You push through that yellow solution, it goes into a waste, and then you've fully exchanged it in that one go. Whereas for an open bucket well, as mentioned, you need a higher concentration, hence the darker colour. And then through mixing or through, so you make your application at this higher concentration down onto the sort of cell well, and then through mixing, you will potentially then get to the right concentration after some time of mixing, or potentially even removing and mixing if you want to do washouts and reapplies. So again, going through that whole sort of system again, we're now on to our third application solution. We've now got a green solution. You've pushed through that pink salmon. The yellow was already waste before. They're both in the waste in the microfluidic channel. And again, that fluid column has just moved through in one go. Whereas again, for the open bucket well, you're applying at a higher concentration, which with mixing and application of your higher concentration, it will equilibrate to the volume that you've got within your bucket well and give you the desired concentration, hence the higher concentration in that bucket wells format. Because of these different formats, the washout in a microfluidic channel is fast and efficient. It's effectively that liquid column that's pushed through your microfluidic channel through to the waste. Whilst for an open bucket well, if you actually want to do a true wash, you'll have to do several of these add, dilute, mix, remove, add, dilute, remix, remove cycles to try and wash out as much as you can of that fixed volume. Because you've got a fixed volume, you don't have that through flow that the microfluidic channels provides. And then finally, because of the scale of what we're dealing with here, microfluidic channels, you can be doing very low volume applications. Whereas again, because of this inefficiency and the need to remove and add and, you know, all of these different steps that you might be doing, by its very nature, it requires a higher volume to do the same level of changing of your solutions. So I've given you some nice ideas, some nice cartoons. I've not shown you any data yet. Before I go on to the ligand-gated data, I just want to introduce something that's very much in this idea about what microfluidics can do versus potentially an open bucket well. And this is the idea of the lipid sink effect. It won't be happening, or you'll be avoiding it as best you can with microfluidics, whereas with the open bucket well, as this almost suggests, you've now got other cells in that bottom of the well, the bucket well. Those other cells you're not recording from. They're just the excess cells that you had in suspension, but they potentially might be acting as a lipid sink. So what's a lipid sink? Matt Bridgeland-Taylor of AstraZeneca and colleagues did a really nice study, very simple in its idea and hence quite sort of elegant as a consequence. Essentially, the lipid sink effect is what this graph is showing you here. So here we've got 5 lipophilic hERG blockers. So these are 5 blockers of the hERG ion channel, and we've got here a PIC50 deviation from conventional patch clamp versus the cell density that will have been applied to the recording well to achieve it. And essentially what you can see is that with increased cell density, you're getting a decrease in the potency as the cell density increases. So the effective concentration that you seem to be applying to your hERG is now lowering because effectively these lipophilic drugs are being absorbed into those lipid membranes of the surplus cells that you are not recording from, but they're still in your well in this bucket well format. And as a consequence of this lipid sink effect, you've got a lowered free concentration of the drug that you've applied. And again, just to sort of actually note on this graph, PIC50 is actually a log scale. So a unit of 1 on the PIC50 scale means it's actually a 10-fold change in the activity that you're seeing. So there can be some quite substantial effects of this lipid sink effect. Okay, so why don't we see it in our system, in the microfluidics channel? Here we've got a cartoon of the microfluidics channel. Again, the external one is the upper one here. Here's your cells in orange, and they hopefully, at least one of them, be landing on your recording site. With the microfluidic system, you can then obviously flush through these excess cells. You don't necessarily want them in that local environment. You want to avoid that lipid sink effect. So as you apply a solution to that external well, it will flush through the excess cells, meaning that in the localized environment around your recording site, the cell that you're actually on, you will have washed away these excess cells and avoid that lipid sink effect. So that is the summary, effectively. Now I should actually try and show you some data that might back some of these claims up. So we're going to go into some ligand-gated ion channel data now. So here we've got the fast desensitizing alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. And we're going to show you an acetylcholine concentration response. You can see on the far left there, this is where we're applying acetylcholine, and then a little while later we're applying an EC, an extracellular flush washout of your acetylcholine. And because of this fast efficient add and remove, the washout, you can get a really nice concentration dependent response. So as we go through the higher concentrations, you'll see the acetylcholine current developing as a consequence of those higher concentrations of acetylcholine, eliciting the bigger currents. This is now almost the time plots, the current time plots, so current on the y-axis here and time along the x, and you can see wash or control, lowest concentration wash out, and then the next concentration, etc. So you get this building current across those different applications. And then obviously we can plot this as a concentration response curve. And from this, we get the Boltzmann fit saying that the EC50 is about 86 micromolar for this nicotinic receptor for acetylcholine, and the EC80 is 370. Okay, so keeping that in mind, we're going to keep this EC80 370 micromolar. We could do, for instance, a number of different acetylcholine stimulations at that EC80 of 370 micromolar. And here I'm going to show, again, you can see the blue lines representing when the acetylcholine comes on in the left, and then the washout with the extracellular solution at that point where you've got almost the pipetta cartoon. So I'm now going to go through the 7 acetylcholine stimulations on this same recording. Second one's a bit smaller. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, I think, if I'm counting right. When we do the time plot for this, time current plot for this, you can see that first current is often bigger, but then 2 to 6 is really quite stable, even though it's multiple applications. Again, hopefully an indication that you're getting a really thorough, nice, clean washout, so that when you reapply, the channel sort of, back into the full capability, no more desensitization due to ligand hanging around. You've hopefully got your population back almost to a resting state. Here we've got 16 recordings in this kind of add, remove sort of plot at the 370 micromolar. Again, the first one tends to be the bigger one, and then by the time you're into the 2nd to 6th stimulation, you're actually getting really quite stable set of stimulations and currents elicited as a result. As a consequence, between 2nd and 6th, on average, with this N of 16 for this plot that you've got in the left there, you're getting only a minus 14% drop in your current between that 2nd stimulation and the 6th stimulation. So again, this is hopefully emphasising the idea that you're getting a very efficient washout with this microfluidic system. So a bit more ligand-gated ion channel data. Here we've got the alpha-5, beta-3, gamma-2, GABA-A, overexpressing HEC293 cells. And again, I hope this will show that we can get fast GABA wash in and out for compound testing in this particular case. So we've now got our EC50 plot that we will have generated, again, using all this microfluidics. You can see here actually that once we've got that EC50, if we apply it 3 times, you can see the traces that are listed between 1 and 3, almost entirely overlapping. It's a really good consistency with that GABA response. And again, we can start to then do potential sort of testing against this GABA response. So here we've got the GABA EC50 in a light brown, and then in a dark blue, we've got GABA EC50 plus a modulating compound potentially. And you can see here it's obviously been inhibited somewhat. We've done this across 12 different compounds. So we've got our GABA control at the start, which sort of shows those 3 stimulations are often very consistent. And then the various different compounds are actually being able to block the GABA response accordingly. And again, all of this is hopefully building up this picture that microfluidics provides a very efficient way of both applying, let's say, ligands, but also in this case, a ligand plus a potential modulating compound to do some kind of test compound screening. Okay, this is now some nice data. Again, this was a collaboration with the University of Copenhagen. We're now actually doing, rather than those overexpressing GABA cell line that we had in the previous slide, we're using a very similar protocol. So you've got those 3 GABA exposures or stimulations via the applications that you're doing, and they're nice and stable over the 3. But with this, we're now doing this now in primary acutely isolated hippocampal neurons. So it will have taken the tissue, minced the tissue up, enzymatically dissociated into these primary acutely isolated hippocampal neurons. And even these are giving us a really nice clean readout because of that efficient capability with the microfluidics. So yeah, again, your controls are nice. You've got a diazepam, positive allosteric modulator down in the corner here, hopefully. Maybe not. My pointer may have died, but you can see it here. I'll use my hand manually. Works, you see. Exactly. But all of the compounds that you can sort of see between that, we've done them in different concentrations, as this arrow suggests. And you can sort of see from that, you can almost get some level of dose response for these different compounds for this particular GABA assay, but this time no longer in an overexpressing cell line, but in a primary hippocampal neuron recording. Okay, so this is some really nice work that we've had for a number of years now. It started off as a collaboration between ourselves, Technical University of Denmark, DTU, and an antibody company not far down the road from here called Iontus. And this was around the development of novel antivenoms. So the idea would be to use recombinant human IgG antibodies. They would potentially be binding various different toxins within snake venoms. And these we could determine because some of the alpha neurotoxins of these snake venoms actually block the muscle alpha-1 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. And the idea would be to sort of develop an assay that could show your IgG antibodies binding, neutralizing the neurotoxin, and consequently meaning that the neurotoxin no longer has the usual effect, which is the inhibition of the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. I won't go into too much detail in terms of the assay development, but this is probably a really good example of not just this efficient and fast capabilities you've got, but actually low volumes. So a lot of these snake neurotoxins, in terms of the way you purify them, potentially if you can, and they're very difficult to synthesize, but if you can synthesize them, they're also, quite a tricky molecule to work with. Likewise, your IgG antibodies. These things are quite scarce, they're quite expensive, and you often have very small quantities when you've purified them. So here we've got 2 very scarce molecules that we're going to be using in the same assay. So the idea is that you've got your nicotinic acetylcholine receptor on your recording site. When acetylcholine binds, you obviously get your current. That current can potentially be blocked by alpha neurotoxins in various snake venoms. And the idea would be to potentially find antibodies that bind these neurotoxins and as a consequence of that binding, they neutralize them. So I won't go through the assay development showing you the acetylcholine responses, because we don't really have time, and the neurotoxin knockdown or inhibition response, and then eventually the double application where effectively you've got your neurotoxin, acetylcholine, and you've got your antibody that's potentially binding the neurotoxin and neutralizing it as a consequence. But I will show you almost the money shot at the end of a lot of this work, which is this lovely piece of work that again, this nice collaboration. Here I'm going to show in a really quite elaborate heat map. This is now a 384 recording well plate map. It's a heat map, so all the reds and greens means you've got the most activity, blues and turquoises less activity. What we've actually got in this matrix comparison, you've got 6 snake alpha neurotoxins across the top. You can see all those labelled, and then down the y-axis, so to speak, on this plate, you've got all the different potential antibodies that were pulled out of various different antibody binding studies for some of these neurotoxins, and the final one is BSA. And you can see, hopefully, that at least some of them have got activity against at least one of these neurotoxins in this test. So these ones with the blue arrows, they're actually sort of showing almost a single neurotoxin has been bound, neutralized, and it stops the neurotoxin activity against the acetylcholine receptor. But some of them, you can see, are actually really quite nicely developed, as in they've actually got multiple activities. So again, the reds and the reds and the oranges are showing that across 2 or 3, in some cases, neurotoxins, you're actually getting that knockdown of the neurotoxin effect. So a really nice sort of data slide in one go, where on a 384 well plate, you've managed to sort of do this cross-matrix neutralization study. Okay, so that was really just to highlight the idea of low volume, because both of those things, or both those key elements, the neurotoxin and the antibody, they're not going to be much of them after you've gone through your purification processes. So it's very necessary in those circumstances to be as efficient and use as low volume as possible. So again, I want to return to my question that I started with. It is a question, it's not a statement. The idea being that if you aren't convinced, you should challenge me. But yeah, is it this match made in heaven for these perfusion channels on ligand-gated ion channel recordings? And again, your Danish word of the day, Valhall. They use it all the time on the streets of Copenhagen. You can't hardly have a conversation without using that word, so keep it in mind. This is the summary slide. Effectively, you saw this earlier. I've now hopefully given you some data that shows a lot of these capabilities, certainly for the microfluidics channels. And with that, I'm treading a very fine line between employment and unemployment at this stage. So what I really want to say is, I want football to be the real winner today, and I want the best team to win. So with those platitudinous cliches, I will now thank the real people that have been helping us throughout this. So there's way too many Sophion scientists and engineers that have put 24 years of microfluidics design and engineering into some of these hardware components that I've been showing. But for the specific data that I've shown today, we've got a number of collaborations that you saw as we were going along. My great colleagues were actually the ones that were producing a lot of this really nice data. And again, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. I hope we've got time for some questions. You do need to challenge me, right? And if we don't get enough time to answer your questions now, I will do my best to catch me in the break if you can, if I'm not running away. We'll try and have the conversation on from there. But thank you for your attention.
We do have time for some questions.
Really nice talk, Damian. So,
Mike.
Really nice talk, Damian. So, I mean, you've pretty much convinced me. But what is the material that's used for all the perfusion system? For instance, when we're studying plants, we get some wacky compounds that don't have ideal chemical properties. So do you ever find anything? And I know that, for instance, Bruce Bean, I remember him saying that they were studying cannabinoids and they had to switch to glass because they saw no activity because the things they were studying was sticking to the plastic. So what's your system like for unusual compounds with challenging chemical properties?
That's a great question, as always, Jeff. It's almost like I planted you. You've got the right shirt on, you've got the right questions.
And you worked in plants.
Yeah. This is what I was trying to get for you. So what this is trying to show you is these almost hashed sort of sections around all of the microfluidics channel. That's all glass coated. So we've tried to minimise that possibility of sticky, horrible compounds by having those key areas where the microfluidic channels are built to have this kind of glass coating around. Yeah. Come on, challenge me. Otherwise they'll think I've paid you all off.
I have a question on the antibody experiment. So
Yeah.
the toxin is binding to the channel and then the antibody is applied later? Or they're applied
Yeah,
together?
actually they're applied together in that one, but I think they've done some data where they've done both. And in some cases with certain really good binding antibodies, I think they can actually they can put the toxin on, get the effect, which kind of sounds a bit crazy to me because some of these toxins are really, really potent, and you're almost like, well, if they're bound, they're not going to come off. But apparently, for some of the antibodies, they're sufficiently, they're almost outcompeting a very strong binding toxin to its amino acid binding site on the channel, and the antibody is sufficiently good binding that it can effectively outcompete an already bound toxin. So effectively, it almost pulls it off the channel. Yeah.
Very nice. Do you have a question, Nick?
This is not very challenging.
Good.
Sorry, yeah, I'm owning up to that now. I just wondered, sorry if you said it, what volumes are you talking about? And also the, those maybe the alpha 7 is that where you have to give a very rapid application before any desensitization, but how quick is that? Do you hit the ion channel?
Great questions, Ruth. And I deliberately have avoided them because they're probably more challenging than you think, actually. The volumes thing is pretty straightforward. It could be anything between 3 and 18 microlitres, as in almost the lower limits, and it depends on the platform. But that would be the lower limits. So really quite low volumes, obviously, certainly versus what you might be used to, even on some pretty fancy, perfusion systems manually. And in terms of the exchange times, I partly didn't go into this because it's probably above my pay grade. I'm not that bright. I certainly don't know anything about fluid dynamics and modelling. I was talking to Annette about this actually because apparently her partner does know a lot about this stuff. I'm like, well, I'm glad he's not here because I don't. But yeah, I mean, we've done various different ways to show that, ion exchange, obviously. Ultimately, we've come down to a range of about 60 to 90 milliseconds as an exchange time rate. And it can depend, obviously, upon ion mobilities, concentrations, how you might be applying these. There's quite a number of different factors that you almost have to sort of take the physical characteristics of what you're dealing with versus, the sort of recording channel that you're trying to, do these exchanges through. But yeah, 60 to 90 milliseconds is about the range that we've most accurately managed to define it as.
Okay, I think it's time to go for lunch. So thank you, Damian. Thank you to all the speakers.
Thank you.